My husband called me while I was in Florence. He said, "I'm divorcing you. And I just sold our company." He laughed. I replied, "That's interesting, because I just transferred everything you thought you owned." He didn't know I'd been preparing for this day for years. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or left behind, this story is for you. Hit subscribe, like this video, and stay with me until the end, because sometimes, the best revenge is patience, silence, and a pen in your own name. The sun was just beginning to dip beneath the Tuscan skyline when my phone rang. I stood on the balcony of my best friend Alessia's villa just outside Florence, sipping a glass of chilled white wine, watching the olive trees sway in the golden breeze. I didn't recognize the number at first. It was American. But the voice on the other end, unmistakable. "Ellie," Damon said, like a wolf who'd already tasted blood. "I wanted you to hear it from me before the lawyers called." I didn't flinch. "Go on." "I'm divorcing you," he said, smug and smooth. "And I've sold the company. To start fresh. With Sienna." The silence that followed was thick, like molasses. I could hear traffic behind him, the faint honk of a horn. Probably calling me from the penthouse I designed. With the art I picked. And the money I earned. I stared out at the horizon, watching the sun disappear. I could almost hear his smirk over the line. "Well," I said, my voice even, calm. "Good for you." Click. He hung up. He didn't wait for a reaction. He thought I was shocked. Hurt. Crushed. I slipped my phone into my silk robe's pocket, walked back into the villa, and exhaled. What Damon didn't know, what he never bothered to understand, was that I don't scream when I'm furious. I don't cry when I'm betrayed. I plan. And I had been planning for this very moment for years. He believed he was the architect of our empire, the business built around elite cybersecurity software, financial forensic tools, and digital surveillance. He thought he dazzled the investors. Wooed the clients. And maybe he did. On the surface. But behind every smooth handshake and keynote speech was my sleepless night. My code. My design. My legal framework. I built the bones of that company. Damon was just the skin. And now the skin thought it could walk off and start fresh. He thought wrong. I stayed in Florence for 2 more days, not out of spite, but because every action had already been set in motion. The final contracts transferring asset control had been notarized 2 weeks ago. My position as controlling shareholder had been quietly solidified through a complex web of voting trusts and holding groups. He never once asked about the details, just signed what I placed in front of him. He was too busy performing. On the flight home, I didn't replay his words. I replayed every lie he'd told over the past 2 years. The late nights. The business trips. The sudden interest in hiring outside help to streamline operations. And Sienna, the woman half his age, supposedly a fintech disruptor, just another piece in his elaborate fantasy of reinvention. When I landed in Manhattan, I didn't go home. I went to the firm. The law offices of Harriman and Pierce greeted me like a cold steel cathedral, marble floors, dark walnut paneling, and a receptionist who didn't blink as she handed me a keycard. "Conference room 4, Mrs. Quinn. They're waiting for you." Inside, David Langford, my legal counsel of 8 years, was organizing a stack of folders with surgical precision. Across the table sat our forensic accountant and digital compliance officer. They all stood when I entered. "Are we ready?" I asked. David nodded. "All documents have been executed. Ownership verified. Corporate structure reinforced." And, he added with a faint smirk, "We've already locked his access. He's going to have quite the surprise when he walks into the office tomorrow." I smiled, a small, tight smile. He called me, I said. Told me he sold the company. David blinked. He what? To start a new life. With Sienna. A low whistle escaped the accountant's lips. He really doesn't know, does he? I shook my head. No. He doesn't. Later that evening, I went home. I pulled into the driveway of the penthouse condo we once shared, lights ablaze, music blaring inside. His car was already parked, aggressively angled, as if that made it more important. When I stepped inside, he was lounging on the white leather sectional like he'd just won a war. Sienna was perched beside him, her heels kicked off, sipping from a crystal tumbler. Eleanor, he said, like nothing had happened. You're back early. I dropped my purse on the entry table, calmly removed my coat, and walked into the living room. Not really, I said. I had to stop by the office on the way home. Something flickered in his eyes. I sat across from them, crossing my legs deliberately. By the way, I said, pulling a leather folder from my bag, you didn't sell the company. He laughed. Loud. The way he did when he thought someone was joking beneath him. Ellie, come on. I closed the deal last night. Then I suggest you call your lawyer, I replied, opening the folder. Because you don't own a majority stake. And you never did. Sienna shifted in her seat. Excuse me, she said. I laid the documentation on the coffee table like playing cards. Each document notarized, time-stamped, sealed. You see, I said slowly, while Damon was charming boardrooms, I was securing legal ground. While he was smiling at cameras, I was restructuring our shares. Every document you signed, Damon, every power of attorney, you shrugged off, it all gave me the rights you never thought to protect. Sienna looked pale. Damon, you told me. She doesn't know what she's talking about, he snapped. This is all performative. She's bluffing. I slid one final folder onto the table. The one marked IRS, SEC, and FinCEN. I'm also not the one with a trail of falsified expense reports and suspicious wire transfers, I said quietly. You've been sloppy. And I've been patient. His voice dropped an octave. You're threatening me. No, I said, standing. I'm informing you. You can either walk away, or I can finish what you started. Sienna grabbed her purse. I need to make some calls, she mumbled, stepping quickly out of the room. I turned to Damon, who looked suddenly small on the sprawling couch. You always said I was too quiet. Too detail-focused. That's why this worked. You didn't see me coming. I walked to the staircase, pausing halfway up. The divorce papers will arrive Monday. You won't like the terms. But don't worry, they're generous. I'm not taking everything. Just what was already mine. I left him sitting there, stunned, betrayed, humiliated. For the first time in years, I slept peacefully. Because the first move was done. And I hadn't even begun to play. The morning after Damon's ego collapsed like a paper castle, I stood in the heart of what used to be his company. Quinn Digital Security occupied the 47th floor of a sleek Manhattan high-rise. The skyline shimmered through the glass walls, but I wasn't there to admire it. I was there to step into the space I'd quietly prepared for myself for over a decade, the seat behind the curtain. The real command center. The place Damon never thought to look. Most employees still saw Damon as the face of the business, the charming co-founder, the public speaker, the genius with a silver tongue. They never saw the woman behind him. The woman who designed the system architecture, negotiated the licensing contracts, and personally coded the original quantum encryption module that made our firm worth 9 figures. The woman who documented everything. My assistant, Talia, met me at the elevator, tablet in hand, nerves in her voice. He's already tried to log in twice. I locked the admin ports. But he might. He won't try again, I interrupted. He knows he's been locked out. Talia blinked. You're sure? I turned to her. I know Damon. He doesn't double down when he's blind. He retreats. He's probably pacing in his overpriced gym right now, texting lawyers and hoping someone will tell him this isn't real. We walked through the glass doors into the central operations wing. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Some whispered. Most just watched. A few nodded subtly. They knew. Has the board been notified? I asked. Talia nodded. All members received the restructure memo last night, with verification packets and updated shareholding tables. They know who's in charge now. Good. And the offshore audit? Already underway. We reached the executive conference room. It smelled of leather and old money. I took a breath and pushed the doors open. Inside, 4 board members were already seated, 3 more joined via video wall. They weren't surprised to see me. In fact, several looked relieved. Eleanor, said Rafe Mandel, our longest-standing investor. I was wondering when you'd finally step out of the shadows. I smiled politely and took my seat at the head of the table. It's time I stopped playing the architect behind the scenes. Across from me, a younger member, Claire Duval, raised an eyebrow. Does Damon know you've taken control? He knows enough, I said. And he'll know more after this morning's review. I tapped my tablet. The screen behind me lit up with a timeline, 10 years of company growth, layered with another track, one no one had ever seen. The hidden layer. The truth beneath the glossy annual reports. Over the last 3 years, Damon funneled over $3.2 million in untraceable bonuses to unverified consulting firms. I traced them to shell entities registered in the British Virgin Islands. At least 4 of them are linked to Sienna Laurel. Gasps. Sharp inhales. One video call froze for a moment, then resumed. The transactions were routed through a private banking proxy in Luxembourg and scrubbed via layered currency trades to avoid taxation. But the mistake, I said, advancing the slide, was trying to use company funds for personal asset acquisition, specifically, the penthouse in Zurich. Rafe leaned back, stunned. You're saying he used our liquidity to fund a private residence overseas? Yes. And he tried to hide it under international business development. The room was dead silent. Claire leaned forward. You knew. For how long? Since the first deviation in our payment integrity algorithm flagged his behavior. I didn't confront him. I documented. Quietly. Consistently. I turned to the board. Because I knew this day would come. The presentation rolled on, digital footprints, expense trails, forged signatures, real-time surveillance captures, all legally obtained under our corporate cybersecurity framework Damon himself had signed off on. When I finished, no one spoke. Until Rafe stood, straightened his jacket, and extended a hand. Eleanor, you saved this company. I didn't shake it. Not yet. I preserved it, I corrected. Now I intend to rebuild it. I left the room without waiting for applause. Praise didn't interest me. Action did. Back in my office, the real one, tucked behind a biometric lock Damon never had access to, I slid into the chair and tapped into the internal logs. His login attempt from last night was still time-stamped on the screen. Multiple tries. Increasingly frantic. He tried to use Sienna's credentials, too. Rookie mistake. She'd been blacklisted before they even checked into that beachfront hotel in Belize. Secure line, I said to the air. The call connected. Langford here. Trigger phase 2, I said. You're sure? I closed my eyes. Initiate the compliance breach disclosure. SEC first, then FinCEN. You're bringing in federal oversight. He forged signatures, laundered funds, and misled investors. That's not a divorce, I said coldly. That's fraud. David was silent for a long time. Then, understood. I ended the call. Then I picked up a folder marked, Private and Confidential. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a sealed deposition from our original investor, a document that had sat in a drawer for years, collecting dust, until now. I slid it into an envelope and handed it to Talia. Courier this to Rafe Mandel. In person. No copies. No emails. She nodded, wide-eyed, and disappeared. Damon had always underestimated me. He thought because I wasn't loud, I wasn't dangerous. Because I didn't argue, I wouldn't fight. He forgot that silence isn't weakness. It's patience wearing armor. And now, the woman he left behind, the one he thought he could overwrite with a prettier face, was the woman holding the matchbook next to his empire. And I was just getting warm. That night, as the city buzzed beneath my window, I sat alone in the penthouse Damon once bragged about to his friends. I sipped my tea slowly. My laptop buzzed once, a message from Talia. Sienna tried to access the financial dashboard. Lockout successful. IP traced to a villa in Monaco, ***. I smiled. Then typed only one word back. Observe. At 4:37 a.m., my phone buzzed once, then fell silent. A single notification. Nothing urgent on the surface. But I'd set the alert to trigger on only one kind of activity, if Damon or any of his proxies attempted to move large assets outside U.S. jurisdiction. He had just tried to liquidate a $2.7 million offshore trust through a private bank in Liechtenstein. I didn't react with panic. Instead, I opened my laptop and began the quiet ritual I'd practiced for over a year, following threads. You don't wage war on someone like Damon Quinn with brute force. You do it with precision. With silence. You don't chase him in daylight, you wait in the dark until he trips on a wire he didn't see, and then you pull. The Liechtenstein trust was old, buried beneath layers of legal language and names I didn't recognize. But as I peeled it apart, file by file, I found the signature. Mine. Forged. He'd used a scan of my old passport. He'd traced my signature, imperfectly. And the digital metadata betrayed him, the document was altered 2 months ago. By someone using Sienna's laptop. Sloppy. I copied the files and forwarded them to our legal team, tagging them for immediate escalation. Then I sent a secondary package to a personal contact, Mara Espinoza, a forensic document analyst from the Treasury Department, and a former classmate from my MIT days. 10 minutes later, she texted back. Confirmed forgery. Want me to run it up the chain? Soon, I replied. Let the rats scurry a little longer. By 8 a.m., I was in a black SUV headed to our Westchester facility. That building had always been the lab. Damon hated it. Too quiet. Too sterile. Not flashy enough. But it was where we housed our most sensitive projects, the kind that didn't need investors or applause. The kind I kept off the books. Inside, the team greeted me like I'd never left. Some of them had heard whispers. Some knew nothing. But all of them worked better under truth than illusions, so I told them what they needed to hear. The company was compromised. Damon attempted an unauthorized sale and asset transfer. We've recovered most of it. But we're not just here to survive, we're here to evolve. A young engineer named Benny raised a hand. Do we still have control over Genesis? I nodded. Genesis was the AI-driven behavioral analytics tool we had developed in secret, something Damon thought was too expensive and unnecessary. It was designed to track human patterns in financial ecosystems. Not to spy. To protect. And it had been watching Damon for 6 months. I pulled up the Genesis dashboard on the wall screen. Watch this. A series of dots pulsed across a global map. Every location Damon had visited. Every transaction he authorized. Every shift in tone, timing, or recipient in his messages. Genesis had flagged them all, color-coded and time-stamped. One dot flashed red. Zurich. 3 days ago, Damon met with a woman listed under the alias Nora Bell. Cross-referenced with facial recognition, that's Sienna's real name. She's been using different identities across 5 countries for the last 7 years. The room went still. She's done this before, someone whispered. Yes, I said. She gets close to male executives nearing burnout. They fall in love with her energy, her charm. She convinces them to take risks. Sell fast. Cash out. And then? Benny asked. She disappears. With the money. But Damon didn't realize he was just her next extraction point. The room shifted. Faces hardened. Engineers who once admired Damon now saw the truth. He wasn't the visionary. He was the victim. Or worse, the willing fool. I stayed at the facility most of the day, re-establishing command chains and restoring firewalls Damon had neglected. We didn't just clean up, we fortified. By the time I returned to Manhattan, a package was waiting on my doorstep. No return address. Inside, a velvet pouch. And inside that, a flash drive. Encrypted. Military grade. I ran it through 3 layers of firewalls before opening it. A video file. Dated 3 weeks ago. Hidden camera footage. Damon and Sienna. In a suite. Not intimate, strategic. They were reviewing documents. Bank statements. Client lists. And a voice, Sienna's, was heard saying. She'll never see it coming. She still thinks you love her. Then Damon's voice, she's too quiet. Too passive. She doesn't fight. That's why this'll work. He laughed. She laughed louder. They clinked glasses. I sat perfectly still. Watching. Not blinking. I didn't feel rage. I felt something colder. More precise. The kind of clarity you only get when the pain finally burns out, and all that's left is calculation. I uploaded the file to 3 secure locations. Then I forwarded a copy to Rafe Mandel. With no subject line. Just 2 words in the body. Board meeting. Tomorrow, ***. At 6 a.m. the next day, the markets opened. At 6:03, I published a private investor bulletin, leadership change at Quinn Digital effective immediately, attached, proof of majority shareholder authority, documentation of recent fraud, and confirmation that all board members had received the evidence. The reactions were swift. Shareholders backed me. Clients thanked me. Investors who once only knew Damon's name were now calling mine. At 6:45, Damon texted me. What the hell are you doing? We can fix this, ***. I stared at the message. Then typed back. You thought I wouldn't fight. You forgot who built the weapons, ***. Send. At 8:02, Rafe called. Jesus, Eleanor. You've nuked him. No, I said. Not yet. This was just the trailer. He was quiet for a beat. And the movie? I smiled faintly. Begins now. I turned in my chair, gazing out over the skyline, the one I used to share with Damon. Now, it belonged to me. And soon, everyone would know the truth. He didn't lose everything because he made a mistake. He lost it because he thought the quiet wife in the corner didn't know how to burn down a kingdom. He forgot. I designed the blueprint. The press caught wind before the ink had even dried. By noon, 3 financial blogs had picked up the investor bulletin. By 3 p.m., it hit Bloomberg. And by the end of the day, the headlines circled every business screen on the East Coast. Quinn Digital founder removed in silent coup, fraud allegations pending. But this wasn't a coup. It was a reckoning. While Damon's face had grinned on magazine covers, schmoozed industry summits, and smiled through interviews about leadership vision, I'd been writing the real story, in code, in contracts, in quiet. And now, the world was reading it. Damon's response was as predictable as his wardrobe. At 5:43 p.m., he held a press conference in front of our old office building, the one I'd already resecured under a new LLC he didn't know existed. He stood flanked by 2 overpriced attorneys and tried to do what he always did best, charm. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, voice rehearsed. "My wife and I are going through a difficult personal time. Emotions are high. Decisions are being made in haste." He paused. "My love for this company has never wavered. I believe in its mission. I believe in the team I helped build. And I'm confident this will all be resolved amicably." It might have worked, if the next question hadn't come from a woman I'd coached personally. "Mr. Quinn," she said, camera rolling. "Is it true you attempted to sell Quinn Digital without board authorization? And that you forged financial signatures to facilitate the transfer of a multimillion-dollar trust into a private offshore account?" He blinked. Smiled thinly. "I won't respond to baseless accusations. But the damage was done. Because in the next hour, the footage of that question went viral. And the trust? It had already been exposed, in a leak I orchestrated with surgical precision. I didn't even need to contact the press directly. I just uploaded the right documents to the right investor forum, and the rest unraveled on its own. He had always believed I wasn't ruthless enough to go public. He believed wrong. Behind the scenes, I was preparing the next phase. Not for Damon, he was already finished. This was for the system that enabled him. People like Damon don't fall alone. They take down allies, loyalists, enablers. I had to be ready. And I was. At 6:12 p.m., I walked into a boardroom filled with every key department head. Some looked anxious. Some looked guilty. But all of them looked at me. "Let's talk," I said, placing a stack of files on the table. One by one, I slid them out. Financial discrepancies. Side contracts. Backdoor commissions. Not just Damon's handiwork, others, too. Sales directors who looked the other way. Procurement managers who rubber-stamped fake vendor agreements. Legal consultants who adjusted wording just enough to let fraud slip through unnoticed. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just told the truth. If you were part of it, now is the time to talk. You will not get a second chance. Those who come clean, you'll have a seat at the table to help rebuild. Those who don't. I already have the data. I just haven't handed it to the authorities yet. Silence. Then, one by one, hands raised. Some confessed. Some cried. Some just nodded. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about rebirth. Back in my office, a courier delivered a package. No name. No label. Just an envelope, thick and heavy. Inside, a USB drive. And a note in Damon's handwriting. You win. Just don't destroy me. Please. I stared at it for a long moment. He wasn't apologizing. He was negotiating. Still playing the only game he knew. I plugged in the drive. It contained a single file, a backup of the original Genesis code, the AI project I'd written years ago before Damon had insisted it was too expensive to maintain. He'd kept it. Buried it. Claimed he deleted it when he'd pivoted the company. The code was clean. Unmodified. My fingerprints all over it. I felt something sharp in my chest, not pain. Not regret. Relief. He had always told me I was wasting my time. That the future was in flashy partnerships and rapid sales. But he'd saved my work in secret. Because deep down, he knew I was the real architect. And he was terrified of what I might build without him. I picked up the phone. David, I said. It's Eleanor. Add Genesis back into the company roadmap. Tell the dev team we're bringing it home. He hesitated. Are you sure? This will draw attention. I want attention, I said. Because Damon had built an empire of illusion. Now I would build one of substance. He had fallen publicly. The world had seen his face crack. But now, they'd see mine. Not the wife. Not the quiet partner. Not the shadow. They'd see the woman who was never behind him. Only waiting. Damon once laughed at me in front of his friends at a fundraiser. She still prints everything, he said, holding up a thick manila folder I'd brought to double-check a vendor agreement. Who needs dead trees when you've got the cloud? They all chuckled politely. I didn't. Because while Damon had his eyes on champagne and speeches, I had mine on the details. And now, those dead trees were coming alive. The boxes were already waiting when I arrived at the archive facility in New Jersey, over a dozen crates, each marked in my handwriting, dated, cross-referenced, and catalogued. Receipts, memos, contracts, and, most importantly, original versions of every quarterly earnings statement Damon ever touched. You really kept all this? Asked Agent Lyle from the IRS Special Investigations Unit, his brows raised as we opened the first box. I don't delete proof, I replied, pulling out a folder labeled Q4-2021. You're aware this goes beyond civil breach, he said slowly, scanning the spreadsheets. If this is as extensive as you say, we're talking multi-jurisdictional fraud, tax evasion, international laundering. I met his eyes. That's why I called you. The IRS was just the beginning. I'd already scheduled meetings with the SEC, the Treasury Department, and, most carefully, a federal prosecutor who'd been building a RICO case for 2 years against a group of shell companies laundering funds through crypto exchanges. What she didn't know, until today, was that Damon's web led straight into their thread. That evening, I laid it out. The entire operation. A decade-long system of offshore entities used for consulting payments. Vendor shells that never delivered a single service. Crypto wallets tied to companies with no addresses. And the final connection, a series of offshore deposits matching the structure of known laundering operations already under investigation. And sitting in the middle of it all, Damon Quinn. She stared at the evidence, silent for a full minute. You know, she said finally, I've seen a lot of arrogance in my career. But this is hubris at an entirely new altitude. It's all so sloppy, I said. He got lazy. He thought no one would ever question the numbers. She smiled grimly. They're about to. Back at my office, I sat alone at my desk, the city glowing beneath the glass walls. My phone buzzed, a message from Mara, the forensic document expert. We ran the rest of your samples. You were right. He forged your name on 4 other documents, including a Cayman Islands account application, ***. I didn't smile. I just filed it. Everything was falling into place. Not by magic. Not by luck. But by precision. This was never about vengeance in the heat of rage. It was about a slow burn, a calculated route, a legal truth bomb timed to perfection. The next morning, I received the call I'd been waiting for. Mrs. Quinn, said the prosecutor. We've initiated the federal freeze. All known accounts. Assets locked. Understood, I said. Would you be willing to appear in person? Already on my way. I arrived in a gray suit. No entourage. No makeup team. Just folders, a flash drive, and 15 years of truth. As I entered the federal building, I thought about every meeting Damon skipped. Every document he told me not to worry my head about. Every little dismissal, every chuckle, every hand on my shoulder that meant, leave this to me. I was never angry about the work. I was angry he never thought I was watching. Inside the interview room, they played a recording. It was Damon, from a month ago, meeting with a private banker. Caught on surveillance. Explaining how he planned to move $8.6 million before the wife figures it out. He laughed on tape. I didn't. They asked me one question, did you know? I answered honestly, I suspected. So I documented. For years. At the end of the day, the prosecutor handed me a copy of the case file. He tapped the cover. This will change things. For him. For you. For anyone who thought corporate fraud could stay hidden forever. I left the building as the sun began to set. No reporters. No applause. Just the quiet weight of justice beginning to turn. In my pocket, my phone buzzed again. Another message. This time from an unknown number. You don't have to do this. Please. Let's talk, ***. I didn't reply. Some men think stories end when they say sorry. But this wasn't fiction. It was evidence. And the paper never lies. The indictment dropped at 8:03 a.m. Eastern Time. It was a Wednesday. Within minutes, every financial news outlet carried the story. Federal charges filed against Damon Quinn for fraud, forgery, and international money laundering. I was in the elevator on my way up to the new executive suite when the notification came in. The air felt different that morning, still, almost reverent, like the city itself was holding its breath. Talia was already waiting outside my office door, her eyes wide with unspoken adrenaline. He knows, she said softly, handing me her tablet. He's already called 3 times. Left voicemails. Let them pile up, I replied. And his attorney, well, former attorney. They just released a statement. She tapped the screen. A video played. A suited man stood outside a courthouse, looking visibly uncomfortable. Mr. Quinn was unaware of the full extent of the financial practices executed under his name. He looks forward to cooperating with authorities and clearing his reputation. I smirked. Cooperate. That was rich. Just last week, Damon was calling me delusional. Accusing me of staging a vendetta. Now he was trying to play innocent. I walked into the boardroom with deliberate calm. The room was full, key investors, senior executives, our global partners patched in via screens on the wall. They all stood when I entered. No one asked where Damon was. I took my seat and opened the briefing packet. Let's begin. For the next hour, I walked them through the road ahead, the corporate restructuring, the investor protection plans, the internal audit procedures already in place. I was prepared for skepticism, doubt, pushback. But there was none. They listened. Closely. Respectfully. Because the truth wasn't just in the documents anymore, it was everywhere. And Damon? He was on every news channel. Every stock ticker. His mugshot leaked before noon. The smirk gone, replaced by a stunned, hollow glare. The caption beneath his photo read, "From tech visionary to federal suspect." I watched it play in the lobby screen as I walked out of the building. Outside, reporters waited. They shouted questions, most of which I ignored, until one voice, clear and firm, cut through the noise. "Mrs. Quinn," a woman said. "Did you know this would happen?" I paused, looked her straight in the eye, and said, I didn't know how far he'd fall. I only knew I wouldn't follow. Click. The shutters fired. The moment captured. That night, I stood in the glass kitchen of my new home, not the penthouse Damon designed, but the townhouse I quietly bought under my own name a year before everything fell apart. Not revenge. Preparation. Always. A bottle of wine waited on the counter. Not opened yet. Not quite time. Instead, I opened my laptop. There was a message waiting, from Marcus, a DOJ liaison. SEC and IRS are moving quickly. Expect additional indictments within the week. You just triggered a systemic investigation, ***. I replied. Let them dig. I left a map, ***. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened a clean document. A blank canvas. And I began drafting the press release. Rebirth. Restructure. Reclaim, ***. That would be the theme. Not the story of a woman left behind. But the story of a company redefined. And while Damon spent his nights in a holding cell wondering what had gone wrong, would spend mine sketching the future. Not in his shadow. Not in his name. In mine. The storm had come. It had drenched everything. Stripped away all illusions. And left only what was real. Me. The temporary signage went up before dawn. Black tarps covered the old letters that once spelled out, Quinn Digital Security. For almost a decade, that name glowed over the Manhattan skyline, a name Damon loved to see lit up at night, like a crown. By noon, the new letters were revealed. Eleanor Systems. No initials. No shared credits. No hiding behind a surname that now only existed on court filings. Just me. It wasn't ego. It was clarity. He had spent years telling me I didn't need recognition, that I was the soul behind the operation, the quiet strength, the stable hand. He never imagined I'd stop settling for shadows. The building buzzed with energy that morning. Staff huddled in new collaboration spaces, analysts clicked away at data dashboards, and engineers tested the latest version of the Genesis protocol, the one Damon had once called an overpriced side project. It was now the core product. And it bore my signature in every line of code. Inside the new executive conference room, redesigned in steel, glass, and silence, I hosted our first restructured leadership meeting. No suits performing. No egos clashing. Just thinkers. Doers. Builders. I began the meeting simply. This isn't a relaunch. It's a correction. They listened. Really listened. And when I finished outlining our mission, to build ethical, impenetrable digital security for those who've been overlooked and underserved, they didn't applaud. They got to work. That evening, I returned to my townhouse and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for years, not to toast Damon's downfall, but to mark something bigger. The moment I stopped surviving. And started choosing. But just as I settled into the quiet, my phone buzzed. A blocked number. I almost let it ring out. But something made me answer. "Eleanor," came the familiar voice, now stripped of its sheen. "It's me." I didn't respond. He exhaled. "I saw the building. Your name. It's impressive." Silence. "I always knew you were smarter than me," he said. No apology. Just the half-confession of a man watching his legacy slip through fingers he never bothered to strengthen. "You didn't know anything," I replied, voice low. "If you did, you would have protected me, not underestimated me." He tried again. "We could have." "No," I cut in. "We couldn't have. Because you weren't building something with me. You were building something on me." Click. I ended the call. No drama. No rage. Just peace. Because Damon had finally seen the truth, not in court filings, or indictments, or even headlines. But in 10 simple letters, gleaming across a steel facade under the New York sun. Eleanor Systems. That night, as the city lit up, I stepped onto the balcony and watched. No one beside me. No one above me. Not a wife. Not a co-founder. Just a woman who wrote her own name at the top of the mountain. And this time, it was permanent. The day Damon's trial began, I wasn't there. I was 3,000 miles away, in a glass tower overlooking the Pacific Ocean, signing a joint development agreement with a cybersecurity firm in Seoul. While Damon was being escorted into a federal courthouse, pale and hollow-eyed, I was finalizing a product that would eventually protect millions of users from the kind of digital theft he once attempted. My assistant paused outside the conference room door. "The press is asking for a statement," she said. I shook my head. "Let them talk. We build." That had become our new mantra, we build. Not because revenge was complete, but because there was nothing left to burn. Damon's empire had already collapsed. The frozen accounts. The cancelled partnerships. The revoked board positions. But more than that, what truly unraveled him was isolation. He tried to spin the narrative early on, "She's bitter. She's ruining me because I moved on." He called it a vendetta. A personal feud. Until the numbers came out. Until the evidence stacked higher than his excuses. And until Sienna, the one he'd sacrificed everything for, vanished from the country without warning. Her departure sealed him in. No more co-defendants. No partner to absorb blame. Just Damon, sitting at a defense table in a tailored suit he could no longer afford, with a public defender he didn't respect. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I never stepped foot in the courtroom. My testimony had already been submitted, supported by time-stamped documents, authenticated emails, and the original Genesis logs he claimed never existed. The media tried to bait me for interviews. Pundits speculated about whether I'd show up for the verdict. But I didn't need to be there. Because the truth, the cold, relentless truth, was already walking ahead of me like a soldier with perfect aim. Guilty. 8 counts. Wire fraud. Securities fraud. Forgery. Conspiracy. The sentence would come later. Years, likely. Possibly decades. But the punishment had already begun. Not in the court. In the mirror. Because Damon Quinn had built his whole identity on illusion, the golden boy, the closer, the genius. But when it collapsed, he realized the empire he thought was his had never really belonged to him at all. He had borrowed everything. Stolen even more. And now, for the first time in his life, he was completely alone. Back in my office, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the Pacific fog roll in. Across the room, a framed article sat on the wall, not about Damon, but about Eleanor Systems, the woman who turned betrayal into a blueprint. It wasn't my favorite headline. But I kept it for a reason. Not for the recognition. For the reminder. People like Damon always come with noise, grand entrances, applause, power lunches. But they forget that the ones who listen, the ones who watch, the ones who keep the books and stay silent. We're the ones writing the ending. And his was already written. My phone buzzed. A text from David, my attorney. Sentence hearing is next month. Do you want to make a statement? ***. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then typed. No. He's already said enough for both of us, ***. And then I did what I always do. I got back to work. The first time someone referred to me as the Eleanor, in a boardroom I wasn't even in, I didn't believe it. It was during a closed-door pitch at a Ventures Summit in Singapore. A junior founder mentioned me in passing. She built Eleanor Systems after burning down her husband's empire with receipts. Literal receipts. The whole room laughed. Then leaned in. I wasn't even there. But my name was. It wasn't that I'd become famous. I had become something else entirely. Proof. Proof that women don't have to scream to be heard. That silence isn't submission. That documentation can be a scalpel, not a shield. That revenge, when channeled right, looks a lot like leadership. But it didn't start as a mission. It started as survival. Every spreadsheet Damon told me was overkill. Every NDA he said was paranoia. Every compliance call he skipped. Every clause he forgot to read. I remembered. And now, the industry did too. By the time Eleanor Systems passed $1.2 billion in valuation, the whispers had turned into roars. Publications that once fawned over Damon were now calling to profile me. Tech reporters, legal analysts, even financial podcasters begged for interviews. I declined them all. Until one afternoon, a woman named Erin from a Women in Tech Foundation reached out with something different. Not a profile. A keynote. We're hosting the Global Ethics and Innovation Summit this year, she said. We want you to speak. I don't do stages, I replied. She paused. We're not asking for the story, she said softly. We're asking for the lesson. That made me stop. Because there was a lesson. Not just about betrayal. But about restraint. About patience. About the long game. I said yes. The day of the summit, I stood backstage in a simple black suit, no script in hand, just a small note card with 5 words. He never saw me coming. When I stepped onto that stage, the applause hit like a wave. But I didn't bask in it. I let it settle. And then I spoke. I didn't talk about Damon. Not by name. I talked about systems. About how some are built to elevate, and others to exclude. I talked about how most women don't fail to lead because they lack skill, but because they're told to wait, and wait, until their voice is welcome. I said I stopped waiting. I ended with this. I wasn't the loudest in the room. I wasn't the one on magazine covers. But I was always there. Taking notes. Watching the margins. Writing code. And when the music stopped, I wasn't left standing. I was the one who owned the stage. The room erupted. Not just in applause, but in awakening. The clip went viral within 24 hours. The quiet queen of Silicon Valley, one headline read. Not a comeback. A correction. Said another. I didn't care for the titles. But I appreciated the shift. Because for years, Damon had told everyone that I was too focused on details, not media savvy, not executive material. But now, he was serving a 14-year sentence. And I was fielding partnership offers from firms that once refused to return my emails. I returned to New York 2 days later and found a handwritten letter waiting at my office. It was from a girl in Chicago. 17. Building a startup from her bedroom. She'd watched my speech 10 times. I didn't know I could be quiet and powerful, she wrote. Thank you for not shouting. Thank you for teaching us that whispering can still change the room. I folded the letter, placed it in my desk drawer, and sat for a long while. She got it. This was never about being louder. It was about being undeniable. Damon's legacy had been noise. Flash. Noise that faded fast. Mine. It was everywhere now. But not as vengeance. As vision. The sun rose slow and golden over the New York skyline, brushing the glass of Eleanor Systems headquarters like it was blessing it. I stood alone in the executive suite, barefoot, coffee in hand, wrapped in silence. The same building Damon once ruled. The same skyline he used to point to and say, "We built that." But he was wrong. He hadn't built it. I had. He just named it. Now, I'd corrected that too. A quiet ping pulled me from my thoughts. My calendar reminder blinked. Quarterly Culture Review, 9 a.m. It was one of my favorite meetings. Not about numbers or markets or press. It was about people. 10 employees from across the company, interns, engineers, janitors, assistants, all given a seat at the table to talk about what felt good, what didn't, and what could be better. Because real power isn't just holding the keys to the kingdom. It's making sure the doors stay open after you're gone. And I was starting to think about that now, not stepping away, but stepping differently. Eleanor Systems had grown beyond me. We were expanding to 5 countries, building data sanctuaries for underfunded nonprofits, and deploying security tools in schools where parents feared for their children's privacy. Real impact. Real work. Not headlines. Legacy. That word used to scare me. It sounded final. Heavy. Like something men carved in marble and women got assigned in footnotes. But I saw it differently now. Legacy wasn't just what people said about you when you were gone. It was what still stood after you stopped fighting to be seen. That's what I had built. Not a revenge tale. A blueprint. My phone buzzed again, a news alert. Quinn trial, final appeal denied. I read the headline once. Then locked my screen. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It wasn't closure. It was distance. Damon Quinn had become a cautionary tale. A faded name in a footnote about what happens when arrogance goes unchecked. And me? I had become the footnote that rose. The whisper that rewrote the narrative. The woman who didn't shout, didn't claw, didn't burn down the system. She built her own. That afternoon, I visited the rooftop garden we'd installed for employee breaks. It was quiet. Wind stirred the wild lavender. You could almost forget we were 45 stories up. I sat on a bench overlooking the city and opened the letter from the girl in Chicago one more time. 17. Code on her hands. Fire in her gut. You taught me that silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's survival. It's sharp. I smiled. Because she would rise. And one day, someone would underestimate her. And that someone would learn, just like Damon did, that the ones you don't see coming? They're already writing the ending. One keystroke at a time. One contract at a time. One quiet revolution at a time. And when the noise fades, when the deals dry up, when the faces on magazine covers disappear, she'll still be standing. Because the legacy. She wrote it herself.